Hi guys, welcome back to the channel for another video. I'm sure you're looking at this background like, Mia, where are you? What's with the curtains? This might give you a clue. It's my Gran's mug. I never once saw her use it, but she's held on to it for what looks like 100 years in honor of Gran, who was not here for this Christmas, which was tough. I hope that you had an okay Christmas. Given it's 2020, or you might be in recovery in 2020, which, what a bonus. But I hope it was as enjoyable and manageable and tolerable as it can be for you. So today I'm doing a video requested by my patrons. They voted on this topic, so of course I am doing it for my beautiful patrons, talking about the real reason and the truth behind why I went into recovery. It's something I've touched on in the past, but I think we were like 45,000 less subscribers at that point, so maybe there's some of you who aren't aware, and I wanted to highlight it in a different way because I think it's a really important part of eating disorders and awareness and recovery that we need to be aware of, and sort of reframe some of the conversations that we have about eating disorders and the fact that they are mental illnesses with physical symptoms. First though, I am running a brand new workshop about challenging and conquering your eating disorder voice. And it went up yesterday. It totally sold out in 6 hours, but I have added 2 more tickets. I'm only adding 2 more because I have been bombarded with emails and messages. They may not even be available by the time this video goes up, but if they are and you're interested, go and check out the link below for more details. This is a 3-week workshop, which includes a 1-hour presentation to kick us off, and then 3 Zoom calls, 1-hour Zoom calls over the next 3 weeks, with our fellow attendees and myself personally coaching you through all the skills and tools and these incredibly effective recovery strategies, which I've not only used myself, but work on with clients and have seen firsthand how incredibly powerful, impactful, and important they are to have as part of your recovery skill set. Go and check it out. If they're all sold out and you want me to run the workshop again, send me an email, leave me a comment, let me know. I can absolutely run it again. Just let me know. Today, like I said, at the request of my patrons, going to be talking in a bit more detail about what it was that ultimately led me to recovery and sort of forced me into a position where I had no choice but to go into recovery. Also, just a bit of a trigger warning on today's video. I will be discussing suicide ideation, suicide, and my experience with both. So if that's something that's triggering to you, not helpful for you, maybe come back at a time when it's going to, be helpful and not a hindrance. But don't feel any pressure to watch this video whatsoever. As I've detailed in previous videos, I personally believe, and I know from my treatment, that my eating disorder developed as a coping strategy in response to untreated anxiety and depression. A whole lot of events happened in a very short period of time around the age of 18, 19, on top of the fact that I'd never had a good relationship with my body. I absolutely hated my body for most of my life and rarely had a good relationship with food. But the eating disorder kicked in at 19 because of this series of events which triggered anxiety and depression, and I had absolutely no way of coping with it or managing it, and eating disorder sort of popped in as a very poor coping mechanism, but the only one I had, which is why I truly believe we need to show ourselves a little bit more grace, forgiveness, and compassion when we're facing the fact that our eating disorder developed. There can be a lot of shame about that and guilt about that, and we can sort of do a bit of a personal beat up about the fact this might reflect our character in some way, that we developed an eating disorder or chose an eating disorder. Not possible, not a thing. But what we're ultimately really doing is trying to survive. The life raft might be full of holes and covered in snakes, but when it's the only one you've got, it's actually a reflection of your survival instinct. The mechanism that you're using to survive, not a totally productive one, not the best one, but if that's all you've got and you're holding on to it, that's actually a reflection of your character that says you have a strong survival instinct. You have resilience, that even though this is the only thing you got to hold on to, you're holding on. I held on for dear life to my eating disorder because I was so depressed and so anxious. This eating disorder, with its rules and its rigidities and its chatter in my head and its chaos, it kept me distracted from how much I didn't want to be here. It kept me consumed in my body and food because that was something which felt like it could be controlled. My life was so out of control. My headspace was so out of control that these elements I could control. as we know, you're not really in control. You have a feeling of control. You don't have the function of control. The eating disorder has the function of control. It is controlling you and putting all these parameters in place that you have to meet. And it sells you the really bad deal of saying, well, you're not in control, but at least you feel in control, right? So for a certain period of time, the eating disorder was keeping me afloat. It was a really, really, really bad life raft, but it was at least keeping me from sinking underwater. What then happened, as it happens with so many of us, predictably, it became its own problem, right? Where it might come in initially to help us manage with trauma, depression, anxiety, whatever it might be that is the trigger, it then actually worsens whatever those initial issues were. No surprise there. Of course, I was not nourishing myself properly. Therefore, my brain wasn't being fueled. Therefore, my distress tolerance was terrible. My anxiety was higher. I had more cortisol, stress hormone being pumped around my body. I had adrenaline coursing through my veins. I was in fight, flight, or freeze all the time, because when you are not nourishing yourself properly, you're on high alert because you're vulnerable. So my anxiety absolutely worsened. It is no surprise that people with eating disorders usually have a crossover with really, really high levels of anxiety. And my depression worsened. It worsened and worsened and worsened over a 6-year period until I started to struggle with suicide ideation. Initially, it had distracted me and kept me, away from the bad feelings of depression because I was lost in the rules and the rigidities and the body focus, etc. And then it became the mouthpiece for the depression. It was just constant, chaotic, abusive dialogue in my head about how terrible I was, how much of a bad daughter, friend, employee, human being I was, how inherently worthless and unlovable and unlikable I was, and that I had no value, and that really, if I have no value, and in fact, I'm probably more of a burden, and I'm probably not that fun to be around. Like, why be here? Why burden people with your presence? And around sort of year 4 out of the 6 years that I was unwell, it was then the 2 years beyond that pretty much every day was riddled with thoughts of suicide. It was absolutely chronic by that point in terms of my mental state. Fast forward to the days before I went into recovery. I was without a job. I had left my job. I was too sick to work. I had cut off all of my friends, people like Mark, Josie, that were not in my life anymore. I had pushed them away. I had essentially just banished everyone who could, see that there might be something wrong. Just pushed them all away. I was barely speaking to my family. I had just got out of a horrendous relationship with somebody, but still beating myself up for that and saying, well, see, that's evidence that you're unlovable and that you don't, deserve to be here and that nothing's ever going to get better. It was days and days and days of me basically at home by myself and just drinking in the morning through to the afternoon until I would go to sleep and have some relief. But my eating disorder wouldn't even let me have sleep. So not nourished enough, not sleeping enough, with depression, anxiety, and an eating disorder, no surprise that my head was in the space that it was in. My eating disorder would wake me up every couple of hours. And we now see from research that people with eating disorders tend to have really disrupted sleep patterns and poor sleep patterns because the body still needs some kind of energy to function even when it's in a resting state. I was drinking this morning and Ellen was on the television, and it just came to me that I was like, I'm not going to be here tomorrow. It didn't come as a plan or some big emotional cataclysmic moment. It was just, I am not going to be here tomorrow. I'm done. I am exhausted. I can't listen to this anymore. I just can't. It's not that, I don't want to be here. It's more, I can't do this anymore. I can't listen to 24/7 abuse. I can't feel hopeless, empty, and just like I'm living in chaos and self-hatred, I can't do this anymore. By a method that I'm not going to detail because that can be super, super, super triggering, I started to take steps to end my life that day. And again, there was no real thought process that went beyond just like the, methodical. It was just all of a sudden eating disorder was quiet, which goes to show how freaking just manipulative and destructive they are. They're just destroyers. And it's finally shut up. Like it was like, oh, cool. I've cornered you. I've pushed you. I've pushed you. I've pushed you. And now that you're about to go over the edge, I've got what I want because you're not going to be here anymore. And that is my aim and my goal and my mission. So it shut up because great. We've got it to the point where she's not going to be here anymore. And that is the goal of the eating disorder. It is not to make you happy. It is not to make you confident. It is not to make you lovable. It is not to put you in a body where suddenly life's going to be perfect. That's its sales pitch for this scenario, that you're not going to be here anymore. That is the only time, and I've now lived it, that is the only time it will shut up, and truly shut up, not goes quiet because you've used a behavior and shuts up for 5 minutes. It was just gone in my head. Probably the alcohol helped as well, in the sense that it like maybe dampened that part of my brain. And I'm using alcohol helped subjectively and purely specific to this situation, not a process I would recommend. It shut up. And because it shut up, suddenly I remember seeing people, because I lived in like a lower floor apartment, like the ground floor apartment. So it was adequately depressing for the moment. And I could see people's legs like going past on the street above, and like people walking with their kids and kids laughing, and, teenagers like chatting with each other, people on their phones, like couples walking past talking. And I could hear them really clearly. And I was like, they are just there. And I feel like I'm on another planet. Like, how come I'm down here doing this and the world just kept, like, people don't live like this, right? I think when you've been in an eating disorder or in a bad headspace, you even start to justify your own experience by being like, well, other people must feel like this, right? Other people must feel like they don't deserve to be here and think on a daily basis about how to not be here. And, they must throw up their food and they must not like feed themselves when they're hungry. And I really used to believe that like people, like everyone threw up their food. I convinced myself of that because then I didn't have to consider that this was something that was very, very wrong. And that no, people do not cope in this way or treat their bodies like this by the majority. There's too many of us who do. But no, this is not normal, quote unquote normal. Common, not normal. I had this like moment of, why am I here? And most importantly, how did I get here? It was like 19-year-old Mia who got sick, suddenly woke up and went, excuse me, what happened to us? Like 25-year-old Mia, what's been going on? This is why are we in this damp, cold, dark apartment at 11 o'clock in the morning on like a Tuesday doing this? And, probably an hour or so away or 2 hours away from losing our life. Like, what happened? Ellen was playing, the vodka was on the table, this process was unfolding. And I suddenly, without the eating disorder there, just shouting me down and pushing down this part of me that could advocate for myself and could think a bit more logically and rationally, I got so angry. I could suddenly see what had happened. This maybe wasn't me. This maybe wasn't just inherently something wrong with me, that something else was very, very, very wrong, because there's the world and here's people laughing and chatting and with families and in relation, and it's okay, then where did I go left? And I think that anger is a really, really, really undervalued emotion, particularly for women. We're told like, don't be angry, don't be shrill. Anger is an emotion with momentum. It's something you can take action from. And I did. I picked up the phone and I called my mother, and 6 years of pain, 6 years of torment, 6 years of illness just came rushing out of my mouth. And I was screaming at everyone and everything. And it was like the suppressed me, the healthy me that the eating disorder self had been sitting on and squashing and squashing and squashing, because that healthy part of you never goes away. It gets so repressed. And because the eating disorder had given just enough space, because it finally had believed it had gotten rid of me, I surfaced and I was furious, terrified. I was resentful. It was so clear to me all of a sudden, like how unnecessary taking myself out of the picture was. Like, what was I doing? Within a day or two, I was very, very privileged and fortunate to be able to get in front of a GP, and a great GP, a lifelong GP. And he put me in touch with the psychologist who ultimately, helped to save my life. I did not have a dietitian. I did not go inpatient. I think some people assume that I went inpatient. I didn't. You do not have to go to inpatient to be valid. If you do need to go to inpatient, that's not me saying you don't have to go to inpatient. You don't have to go to inpatient to be valid. Your recovery is just as valid if you didn't go inpatient. I didn't even know what inpatient was when I went to recovery. There was not nearly as much discourse, awareness, or as much of there really was no recovery community, except maybe a little bit on Tumblr. So I had no awareness of that. Now it seems to be a big thing that, like, to be valid, you have to go to inpatient. No. I literally just had a psychologist and muddled through with everything else, like challenging food, making myself eat regularly, just muddled through. It worked, thankfully, but it just goes to show all of these like recovery expectations you have might be limiting you. Whatever help you can get is valid, is necessary, go for it. In tandem, obviously, with treating the eating disorder, what we really got into was the depression, was the anxiety, was, the events that led up to that, and, the associated trauma. And as much as, yes, challenging the food and doing all of that stuff was essential, if I hadn't addressed that stuff, maybe my eating disorder would have been healed, but without healing that, I truly believe it probably would have jumped over to something else, like maybe alcohol abuse. We see that a lot. We see comorbidity between eating disorders and substance abuse, alcohol abuse, because the pain is still there. The wound is still there. The eating disorder is like a sedative, right? Imagine going into a hospital with a wound, a life-threatening wound, and all the doctors give you is painkillers. They don't, operate on the wound. They don't clean it out. They don't do anything. They just give you painkillers, right? And then eventually the painkillers wear off and the wound is only worse. Now it's infected. And they just keep giving you painkillers. And then your other parts of your body start to be infected by this wound, and your organs start to be affected and start to shut down, because all these people are giving you, like the eating disorder, is painkillers, is numbing you, is making you not feel the pain. So it doesn't make sense to then go and address the eating disorder and not address the wound. You take away the sedative, you take away the eating disorder to cope, the wound becomes the thing that you've got to address and you've got to heal. The reason I talk about that, and I think it's important to highlight why I went into recovery. Yes, physically, I was unwell. Physically, I had really not great symptoms. None of them showing up in my health markers, none of them showing up in my blood work. Another thing, doesn't need to be showing up in your medical chart in order for you to need and pursue recovery. Absolutely not. Which links back to the exact purpose of this video, which is to share with you that these are mental illnesses with physical symptoms. Yes, we lose people because of the physical effects of the illness. One of the main reasons and ways that we lose people to eating disorders is suicide. It's one of the leading causes of death with the eating disorder sufferer population, and we don't talk about that enough. A lot of people believe, well, I've got to have this physical symptom or that physical effect, or I've never had any poor physical symptoms result from my eating disorder, so I don't need to go into treatment. Well, not right now. Your physical symptoms might develop down the track, and what you're doing right now is contributing to what's going to happen later. But also, you are experiencing symptoms. If your head is not a nice place to be, if you don't value yourself, if you have something in your head abusing you and telling you you're terrible and making you use behaviors that you would go to jail for if you did it to somebody else, then you have symptoms. You have life-threatening symptoms, because if you listen to that enough and you live in that world enough, there's a really high chance that you're going to get to a point where you don't want to live in that chaos and abuse and that world anymore. For some people, eating disorders are not coping mechanisms. For some people, eating disorders kick off because of a genetic component, and also because they went through maybe a restrictive phase with their eating, and that's enough to trigger the eating disorder. For a lot of people, this is a coping mechanism. It is something that has been adopted to protect them in the short term from things like trauma, like anxiety, like depression, and addressing the eating disorder may not be the whole story for you, and that's okay. Whatever the composition of your eating disorder was and whatever the composition of what your recovery will be is absolutely fine. If it's not reflected in other people's experiences, that wouldn't be news to me. I have worked with many, many, many people in the 3 years I've been an eating disorder recovery coach, and I've spoken to thousands of people in the 7 years I've been advocating. No two stories are the same. No two experiences are the same. No two individual specific needs in recovery are the same. So meet yourself where you are. I'm going to leave some crisis lines below, because if you are experiencing something similar to what I did, I would now recommend maybe, before calling mum and letting rip, probably calling a helpline like Lifeline here in Australia. But yes, I wish that advocacy and awareness would spend more time focusing on one of the leading ways we're losing people, which is the place in their head just being so painful that they just can't do it anymore. And most importantly, that is not the answer. That is not the solution. It is not a solution. You can get better. You can heal. The world can open up to you and brighten and be wonderful and fantastic and amazing. And you can learn how to cope when it isn't. The world needs you in it. I am grateful every day it occurs to me how incredibly grateful I am that I did not follow through on that process, that I am still here, and that I can speak to you guys and hopefully be a demonstration of why you must stay as well. Okay. Sending you guys so much love. Come and join us on Patreon if you want to see these early. A big Happy New Year to you all. Don't forget to check out the course if there's tickets available. If there's not, let me know if you want me to run it again. And I will see you in 2021. I'll definitely be popping a bottle of French champagne and saying, see you 2020. Anyway, guys, much love. Take care. See you next year.